Oh my God. And here we are. The fucking GOAT, the absolute legend, Robert Hood, floor plan of the underground resistance and of the Detroit techno musicians, the Detroit techno icons, gods, if you will. He was always my favorite. And the music that he made was always my favorite. The closest thing that I can describe the evolution of my personal taste, my musical taste, and also the music that I play in my DJ sets with, is that I used to be a Robert Hood type person and I would only play the Robert Hood tracks. And nowadays I've become more of a floor plan person and I play the floor plan tracks. Oh, that's a pretty tasty setup, actually. I see a space echo, rhythm arranger. Yeah, I see a Moog equalizer, that's nice. Yeah, studio setup. This reminds me of a few things, actually. I mean, I was always a bit obsessed with like studio gear and studio machines, even though I never fully had like the money to get them, to be honest, especially back in the days. But there were a few key factors that really made me like obsessed with them. Before I studied communication, I studied audio engineering, and that was the first time that I would have access to these legitimately like insane studio spaces that felt like you were walking into these like spaceships a little bit. I didn't know how to handle them. I didn't know what to do when I walked into them, but I knew that it looked beautiful and that it was kind of the certain type of magic there. You know what I mean? The second thing that really made me like interact with them that time as well was FIAC, because they were obsessed with analog gear. And they were the first ones who like taught me how to use it a little bit. They taught me how to use a 909, taught me how to use a compressor. They taught me how to use a 303. And they also taught me that once you work this analog gear, all the rules are kind of out the window. There is no wrong with analog gear. If it distorts, let it distort. Fuck it. Maybe that makes it sound much more beautiful, like when it wouldn't distort. If you pull the cable out the back of something and it makes a great sound, fuck it, record it. If it has like a little bit of a mistake and has this like sound underneath it, that's of course not ideal if you want a clean sound. But if you just want a sound to use, record it, use it. Oh, wow, that hits me very, 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 very hard. Oh my God, I think I owned exactly this figure here on the side. You hit me more in my childhood fields than you could, because I don't think I've ever talked about this. When I grew up, I had these boxes of just figures. I mean, my parents were like translators, so we weren't exactly rich. The main part of the toys I had in my childhood, we picked up at the flea market because it was like a Sunday ritual for my parents and me, picking up figurines from these people that were like sitting on carpets that were like from the Batman series or Star Wars or something that I didn't even know where they were from. It triggered my imagination so much. But we would like throw them all together in this big overarching like Sunday cartoon vibe narrative where they will all like come together. And it was incredible. And yeah, because it was a Sunday ritual, at some point I had these just legitimately like crates and crates and crates of action figures, like loose action figures. And they looked, when you looked inside them, it looked exactly like this, like 100%. You would look in and you would see like Ewoks, Jabba the Hutt, but you would also see Power Rangers figurines, like some loose bullshit. Very, very early days of getting a feeling for how much imaginative storytelling and building my own universe means to me, and something that would accompany me until now, to be honest, because I still have the biggest just love for world building and trying to create these places to get lost in for myself. Oh, wait. What place is this? Do I know this place? I don't think I do, but it's in a record store, an in-store session with a DJ playing. Funnily enough, I don't think I've ever gotten to do, but these types of sessions are, I think, some of my favorite things to do as a DJ. What I have done is like play radio stations. And I imagine that being kind of the vibe as well, because it's like these intimate places where you can just like play the records that you love and that fit with what this record store represents. And this kind of vibe with like you go to a record store, there's a session happening, and you are laying down music for it. I love that vibe. And I've attended many of these because I always think it's like one of the more interesting contexts to play records in. Yeah. And here we are. Yeah, me and my dad. Without Humst, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today, or I wouldn't be where I am today, I guess. He's shaped me maybe more than any other person in the world, quite possibly. I mean, my mom, obviously, too. Shout out to Mom, I'm not forgetting about you. Yeah, unfortunately, the good man passed away when I was 16. Of course, making that legacy that he leaves behind even greater in a way. Yeah, there's something about him never having heard the music that I make nowadays that always still doesn't sit fully right with me. He gave me my first record player. He was the one who I pulled like records from the obscenely large record collection that he had. Just like pulling records out and being like, yo, can I listen to this? Yo, can I listen to this? And then just like putting them in my record store. Through him I discovered The Cure. Through him I discovered Kraftwerk. I think I wanted to become a musician since I was a baby, only because through my parents I was confronted with the concept of music from the start of my life. And in a way, my parents, I always say that music is the red thread that is completely woven throughout my entire life. Because the first dream job I said I want to have when I was a baby, maybe only like 1 or 2 years old, was while everyone else wanted to be like a firefighter or an astronaut, I wanted to be a rock star. You know what I mean? And like, so legitimately from before I even have memories, that red thread of music was already woven into my life by my parents, by the love that they have for music, me seeing this love and me wanting to love it the same way. And yeah, I'm infinitely grateful to them for that. Infinitely grateful. I still use something very much like this. Actually, like, look at my hair. How happy are you that I came with hair like this and that you put this picture in there? There's a fucking... Okay, there's actually like, I'm not sure if that's even still the design of the package, but I think it is. It's the Got2b. Shout out Got2b. It's the Got2b hair glue. And it features this drawing of a punk on the like packaging with spiky hair. And back in the day, I would see this stuff and be like, if I just use this hair glue, I can look exactly like this. And that's all I wanted, you know? I saw this type of hair and I grew up watching anime where it was like Goku and all these characters had this insanely spiky hair. And I was like, this like punk haircut is the closest thing that I can get to that. And there came an interesting full circle moment when like getting this new haircut of mine and talking to my hairdresser. And I was like, so how do I style this at home? And he's Japanese and he was like, had this like very contemplative moment, like, you know, styling gel from the supermarket, like styling glue, I think. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Actually, you know what? It makes me think about sticker culture and growing up with sticker culture, actually, because like I remember the place where I used to have like band practice, and like just everywhere you would interact with music, there was always like stickers, you know what I mean? On the walls of any toilet, the walls of any club, of any like place. Because I used to have a record label when I was like 17, 18, funnily enough. Don't think I've ever talked about this, but I used to manage a record label with a friend of mine whose name was Butch. Shout out. And of course, we were like, you know, the first thing before we even have signed any music or anything like that, before we made any music, first thing you had to do was print stickers. You know what I mean? Like you couldn't have a label, you couldn't be a musician, you couldn't have anything that's like has anything to do with music without having stickers. And then just smack the shit out of some Berlin walls with the stickers we printed. But I just remember you would interact with, I think, like Berlin music culture so much through these stickers, even though maybe you would never like look up the links or anything like that. It was just like such an important piece of growing up in the Berlin music scene was this aesthetic of stickers everywhere, everywhere.
It's all my